Today we welcome Eric Grossman. Dr. Grossman is the Director of Future Learning and Educational Outreach at Emory and Henry College. He is helping the college expand its academic offerings to non-degree learners in every stage of life. Eric received his doctorate in education from the University of Louisville. Eric has thought and written extensively on the implications of technology for education. He speaks to us today on the topic of cyber virtue. Welcome, Eric.
Good morning. Late arrivals. Thank you for inviting me. It feels very good to be here among you again today. Say again because third consecutive year. Okay. Doesn't sound like that big a deal to you, but take some pride in that. I feel like either of the second or the previous two could have kept you from inviting me back. So appreciate the vote of confidence. My coach in college used to say, one time's a mistake, Eric. 2 times a problem. 3 times we got a pattern. So I'm at 3 times. So we got a pattern here. I'm thinking it's time to name this thing. I'm thinking Eric's Bleak Midwinter Talk Series. Does that sound good? It works on a lot of levels. It's cold out. You know it's bleak because we've got months more of cold to go. If it's warm, it's bleak because who knows what kind of hell we're marching toward with global climate change. So that's good. That works. Then there's also the content of what I have spoken about the last couple of years. If you recall them, maybe worrisome is the right term. And in my sort of educator's spirit, I don't really bring answers to some of those worrisome problems. Now, why were they so worrisome? I think I told you my method for discerning what I should talk about. The last 2 years, it's pretty simple. I just took the thing I thought was the most important. Like, I'm just going to figure out the most important thing. That's what I'm going to talk about. So not too surprising that I would end up with, kind of weighty, deeper issues. So, we've covered that, so I decided to try a different methodology this year, which maybe you'll be happy to hear. I decided to, when I heard from WAVA, just take something more topical. I've been teaching a course for our incoming, first-year students at Emory and Henry. It's like a transition seminar, time-tested method for, sort of helping young people transition. So these are 18-year-olds. I was kind of asked at the last minute last fall, so I came up with a different topic. It was this cyber virtue topic. And I kind of took a different approach. I didn't have a lot of things queued up to tell them. And I don't like telling young people things anyway, so I encourage them to think about a set of eight questions or issues that I think have been emerging along with technology. And so I'll give you a couple examples. So we had the subtitle for this cyber virtue course is Navigating Morals in the Age of Technology. Okay, so one topic I gave them to think about was, does technology offer good tools to enforce moral behavior? And the way I set this up, I assigned them the topic, and then I assigned them a position. You will show us evidence, you will research and show us evidence that would help us think about, your side, that either no it doesn't or yes it does. And you'll present to us. I'm going to survey everybody before the topic. You're going to present. Your partner is going to present. We're going to discuss. We're going to have conversations. We're going to record some of those conversations. And then I will poll you again, and we'll see if all that led to some productive changes in how you're thinking about things. So I felt like that was a pretty good approach. Let's try that. And the reason I think it was so compelling when I heard from WAVA to report back to you about this is because I found some surprising, feedback about what young people think and say about these topics. which really are more relevant to them and their future, perhaps, than to us. So, I'm going to report on 3 of these. I'm giving you some of the other examples. I think any of them could lead us to sort of a compelling conversation. So feel free to, sidetrack me anytime, but let me just give you some other examples. So another one that I had them consider is, are the most significant aspects of personal reputation now reflected online?
Yes.
Got some interesting answers back on that. Will comedy be a way to distinguish human from artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
Will humans ultimately have to submit to artificial intelligence? If you recall, we did something like that a year ago with my talk to you, something on artificial intelligence. You can tell from the flavor of these, I picked things, that would be complex to think about, not obvious answers, and encourage them not to think of them in overly simplistic ways, but to really think critically, articulate reasoning, have conversations about these. And it kind of works surprisingly well. And I'm going to try, I thought for today, to report, from the field in their voices as much as possible. I'm going to try to use technology and actually play you some of the conversations, some clips of conversations that I had about these. Now, my particular report back to you guys is on 3 topics. One was social media, because I think that's quite familiar to everyone. Another is virtue signaling, and I chose that really because it was surprising, I guess, and it ended up exactly splitting not just the class, but like even individuals. They could just flip back and forth on how they thought about virtue signaling. And finally, because I like to be a little provocative, sex robots is my 3rd topic. So brace yourselves. 3 is a pattern. We can't change that now. All right, so on the question of social media, I asked, are social networks good for people's well-being? Are social networks good for people's well-being? I think you can tell that would be fairly difficult to sort out. There's a lot of ways to look at that, I guess. And I had a scale in my survey: 0, definitely no; 10, definitely yes. And their average score, before we had any discussions, 4.7. So split them pretty well. My goal was, with these questions, to kind of get them split. So let's see if the technology works here to play their voices. I also brought a transcript, so if I have difficulty hearing, I may just stop and read you some of what they said.
It can kind of go both ways. It really just depends on how you use it. Because if you use it like me, I just get on, look at some stuff just to entertain myself, look sports, clips and all that. And then I get off because I'm mainly focused on stuff I'm doing in real life, like sports, school, and all that. So I don't really have time to actually get addicted to social media, I guess, as I say. So yeah, it's just how you use it.
It's just perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
How you approach it.
But because it doesn't have to be the same for everybody.
I think the topic is very complex. I don't know if I would say that, but I would definitely say that while there are benefits to social media, it definitely does not outweigh the detriments. Yes, it can be good for your self-esteem, but it has been proven to be very bad for your self-esteem. There are lots of statistics in social media. In class, there was a thread about how suicide rates and depression and anxiety rates have been up. It is overall creating a positive impact. And an impact on your well-being means I'm feeling better because of this, or I'm feeling good because of this. And a lot of what's happening is I feel bad because of this. And which isn't surprising. Like, there's Photoshop and there's editing services and there's catfishing and whatnot. And so, like, people see pictures of other people and they're like, oh my god, I should look like that. Why don't I look like that? Or they see hate comments when they post something, and it's really depressing. And that doesn't outweigh that I feel really good about this because, like, I miss this person, and that was a really cute picture, and now I'm going to have a happy day because of that. That impact doesn't last as long because as humans, we're, like, biologically wired to focus on the negative. Like, we can have 10 positive comments, and we'll focus on the negative one because we agree with it on some level, usually. It's our worst fears that are coming true through somebody else.
It's some insightful conversation there, isn't it? And a little bit tracking the data that was also presented during those student presentations, and that there's not a lot of clear data about male negative outcomes, but there is clear data about negative outcomes in females, particularly young females. And I think that's what she's referring to. But I can't help but remember that Harry, right at the beginning of the service, was commenting on, he's been following, our family's activities virtually on Facebook, right? So as the young woman pointed out, man, it can be a really fun way to keep up with people and old friends and all that. So, again, a little bit of could look at it both ways. Turns out that after the discussions and the evidence was weighed, students surveyed came in at 4.1 on average, as opposed to 4.7. In terms of scale, remember, 0 to 10, with 0 being the lowest. So actually thinking about it made them think it was a little less good for people than they had originally thought. But believe me, these are technology skeptics, these 18-year-olds. That's probably the biggest initial surprise that I had. They're starting at 4.7, right? And we used to say, oh, these digital natives, that's just going to be second nature to them. It's just their lives. It turns out to be quite a bit more complicated. I feel like in a lot of ways I'm more, I don't know, of course I present sometimes the pessimistic view, but I'm actually more optimistic, I think, than our 18-year-olds who are showing up at our colleges. So a little pause for reflection. Let's see. So second topic, and we can discuss any of these. I don't mind if you interrupt me, but I'll go ahead with the other two, and we can go back, I guess, to any of the topics. So the second one, remember, is virtue signaling. I just asked, does online virtue signaling promote moral progress? Okay, so before.
Hey, Eric, can you tell us what that is? What's virtue signaling?
Yeah, and a lot of them asked the same thing, and I thought, oh, I see it all the time. It's sort of, it's used as an epithet. It's like virtue signaler. Oh, look in the program. Harry gave an example of virtue signaling in the program. His cartoon, I think it's of a dog announcing that he's a vegan and a cat lover in a little bubble. Or he's got a sign or something. Is it a sign on him? He's got a sign, literal signal, of his veganism and his, I don't know, what's that, animal rights, PETA sort of membership. Yes, exactly. So it's virtue signaling is letting others know of some virtue that you announce. And I think therein lies the ambiguity. It's an announcement, rather than an action. So we had quite effective presentations on either side. Now, they were at 5.8 before the presentations and discussion, meaning just slightly, better than neutral. that this maybe does promote moral progress. But we had a very effective presentation about all the different things that you might see online of someone announcing something, virtuous, that then it turns out, they, I don't know, they flew, say they're anti-global climate change activism, but then they're flying to all their various presentations in big jets. So it's that kind of thing. It's like, does the action match the signal? Was the kind of idea of that presentation. But we also had a very good presentation on the other side about how it might actually, promote attention, positive attention, and sort of consciousness on the side of doing things that would be helpful. So you'll hear some of that. I think it'll become a little more clear with some of the conversation that was had around virtue signaling.
I think it's good because it helps. If you post a picture of using a reusable straw, then other people are going to be like, why are all these people doing this? And they're going to look it up and then be like, oh, well, it's hurting the sea turtles or any other animal, and maybe they'll stop doing it.
Anything can be a virtue signal.
Okay.
And like I said, ice bucket challenge. That was that's one of the virtue signals. And how would you feel about that?
I mean, it came out of nowhere. I feel like necessary.
Why is that?
Because it's no fun at dumping water off somebody's ice bucket,
But the point of virtue signaling is to get your point across and get awareness of that cancer or whatever disease it was, and to get support, not money, but just support and awareness can help and go a long way to that disease.
Well, what about the average person that's it would probably rather see the other average guy that doesn't go to the gym every day but still wants to do the exact same thing he's trying to do. Because he's not going to release the person that's going every single day. He's trying to make that huge change.
With me, if I see a guy who's super overweight, he's trying to better himself, and every day and working out, and then I kind of question myself. It's like, he's doing all this. What could I be doing?
So he has determination to get better.
Yeah, what am I doing to get better?
We're not really determined to do anything unless you just really just want to look really good or something like.
Well, you just said another thing that we should consider the virtue. It could not just be health. Being healthy is a virtue, but it could be being determined to make something happen. Could be a virtue. That's right. And so just by showing determination, it might be a way to get other people to develop. Because it's funny.
So you get the idea there. These are classroom discussions that I had them record on their devices. It becomes so easy to do that. Memory on your device is so cheap. I said, bring your phone and let's record this, and then send me a clip. And then I just assembled some clips. So most all of this is just what they said during class. Which it kind of reminds me, this is 30 years I've been an educator. And there are times, we get a little cynical, I guess. Get a little worried about the trajectory, especially perhaps in higher education. But I think something that all of us value, I know I do, is that every season, every semester, every year, it's like the refresh button gets hit, and we get to look at something sort of, I guess, through the eyes of a young person, or at least, consider what the perspective of the young person is as we try to process the information again and think through something. So I love that about teaching, is that as long as we keep that in mind, that we're trying to constantly refresh our own thoughts. It's not that I'm, just taking on board what young people are thinking, but it's also not that I'm pushing on board something that I have onto students either. It's a chance to kind of collaboratively rethink something, and I really appreciate that. And this was a really good example. I was one of those pointing fingers at virtue signalers Like, that's just, I don't know. It's like a bluff or a facade, and just, be quiet and speak through your actions kind of thing. But this is a different world, in that sometimes the message, and the delivery sort of ride together, something like that. So I really appreciated thinking about those topics. If you don't want to get sex robots, you need to hang me up on virtue signaling. They, of course, saw that was on the syllabus, and then they were primed to get to that topic throughout. It's not as bad as it sounds, by the way. So we can go on to it if you want. We can talk virtue signaling a little more. I don't know if I said, but after they were at 5.0 in terms of does online virtue signaling promote moral progress. And I think to a person, if you ask them, they said, I think about it, I think it's good, and then I think about it, and I think it's not really helpful. So it's really split down the middle of is that good or not. So it was quite interesting. Okay, I'm going to swipe left here. Okay, so as I told them, sex robots, I don't think it's a big thing just yet, like in terms of the embodied, actually built robot. But it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for all the ways that human intimacy can be, simulated. And so the question is, are sex robots, meaning all these ways of simulating sexual relationships, are they replacing human intimacy? Do they threaten human intimacy? That's the real question. So they were quite a bit more thoughtful, than you might expect. I mean, it got a little bit awkward at times, but the students who presented, were quite sincere and deliberate about what they were doing, and it was an interesting discussion. Unfortunately, the audio is really poor on one that I thought was really interesting to listen to, so I'm going to try it. But like I said, I do have a transcript as well. The average feeling about, are they replacing human intimacy was 5.7 before. So a little bit more like, oh yeah, maybe so. Like this idea, and let's face it, a lot of it's just porn. It's this, ready availability of porn and things like that is replacing human capacity to engage, person to person. I think they were leaning that way before the discussion. Did you want to ask something before?
Just answered it.
Okay. Yeah. So, there was quite a pessimism that you could hear among the students before the presentations. And this was one of those cases where the presenters actually persuaded the class. Like there was a very different tone after the presentations and the discussions, so that they actually perceived it to be less of a threat. And I'll play that in a minute. But
what is sex?
You got to ask. And actually, my student, I was a little bit worried about researching. I came up with a topic to be provocative and to be a metaphor. But I was like, well, I need to know a little something about what's actually out there. But, you're searching on your work computer for sex robots. It's like, man, my history is not going to look too good if anybody pokes through this. So I poked a little bit around on the topic to find that, in China you can order what used to be just like a sex doll, I don't know, mostly latex or I don't know. But then it has a little bit of intelligence built in where it can respond and talk to you, and that's what I found. But then a student, who I said was quite sincere, did this in a very direct, straightforward way. He found the actual sex robots online in California. They're making these things, and they are, getting rapidly more realistic. Now, I don't think it's anything of a scale that would have an impact on society at this point, and I kind of doubt it's going that way. The much bigger thing, and the students recognize this, was all the other ways, all the other technological tools for simulating human relationships. I mean, including like even just dating apps, but then, sex toys and things you can look up online, pornography, and all that kind of thing. So that's really what we were talking about in terms of what might be affecting human relationships right now or threatening them in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, apparently they have been robots, they have been Jason where they will have sex with these robots, like a proton, but apparently they haven't been successful. They have closed, they have been shut down, and it was not for moral reason, it's just because it is the most successful.
Yeah.
Here in South Korea.
When I read about one in Europe somewhere, by Denmark or something, I think there was just a trial. Definitely nothing of a big scale. But I think I saw that as well. I think the California sex robots were maybe more Hollywood, movie props kind of thing. I don't really know actually, but that's what he found, and sort of he found a YouTube video where you could interact essentially with. I don't know. I think probably that uncanny valley problem that you hear about in robotics and artificial intelligence. Harry will know about that. Just where it looks too lifelike and then it's just creepy. So, if it's not real.
Well, in terms of technology impacting intimacy, not going so far as sex robots, but just thinking about like texting.
Yes.
So people may be trending towards just sending little snippets of text rather than engaging in deeper conversations. That seems to me like more of a threat for technology impacting human intimacy than sex robots.
Yes. Well, and remember, we tried to put those technologies in the umbrella as part of the sex robot industry, metaphorically. Yes.
It's come a long way from Woody Allen's movie when he presented the orgasm shot.
Everything you want to know about sex but we're afraid to ask? Was that the movie?
Yeah.
Yes, I remember. I read that book too as a young person. There was a book and then his... No, I know. It's a very serious book. Well, informational, let's say, and then a spoof of a movie about it. But I recall laughing quite a bit. I still recall a scene of the sperm, dressed in sperm suits and getting ready to jump. So, it was just pretty goofy. Would you like to hear what they said? I may have to read some of it. So let's just read it from the outset. Okay. I'll read it and then I'll play it through so you can get at least the tenor of his voice. He was quite a involved young man I had in that class. I was really appreciative of his willingness to speak at length about a lot of these things. So he says, I think it will increase marriages. Sexual robots take up the physical part. That will leave the emotional part. The emotional connection you want with another person, and then that will lead to deeper relationships and probably more marriages and more people staying together. Now that would be a reversal of a trend, we've been saying.
Automatic version of dentistry.
Yeah, they did not say that, but yeah, I guess. A legal mistress.
Or mister.
Yeah.
Increase marriages. I think marriages are first. That's yeah. Sexual robots take up physical part of it. They don't leave that emotional part. The emotional connection with the other person. That'll lead to deep connections and eventually probably more marriages. More people like just stay together. Probably increase more marriages. I think marriages have increased because people. Sexual robots take up the physical part of it. They don't leave the emotional part, the emotional connection with the other person. That'll lead to deep.
We are a needs-driven species, so it does not matter
what we come up with to simulate sex, it's never going to be enough to satisfy us in our needs-driven things. It's just going to keep it's never going to satisfy us.
Relationships.
I think that with the building of relationships, there is a lot of growth. The same way that like sports help you grow. There are hard days and good days, and both sort of culminate experience, and that's what humans are here for, is to have experience and so I think taking the experience out of that. I think that's the piece of humanity, like really just detrimental to our existence. But
I might read that piece. It's really good, too. So, this young lady says, I think with the building of relationships, there's a lot of growth the same way that, like sports, help you grow. There are hard days and good days, and both sort of culminate experience. And that's what humans are here for, is to have experience and to do things. And so if you take the experience out of that piece of humanity, like relationships, it's detrimental to our existence. I kind of like to leave it there. She spoke to several things I care about there. So what do you think? Do you want to go back to either of the other topics, or I think I could pretty much leave my remarks there.
So about a day after the class, what was the deal?
Yeah, so it was down to 4.6 on average. So remember they had started up at 5.7, and these are averages, but that's a pretty good spread, but I don't know that it captures the tenor, the tone, that I felt definitely shifted. Like everybody felt that and could have said that, hey, we've got a different take on this now. That does appear that, maybe we'll be okay. Maybe it's not all gloom and doom. We're headed, toward just interacting with our devices in private, but that in fact, maybe like the mistress, we can then pursue more transcendent relationships. Paul and them.
Okay.
Yep. Did the students talk about their own experiences? Were they self-disclosing when discussing these issues? Did they talk about their own use of porn, or did they tend to talk more in the abstract?
It did get a little awkward. You could tell, students were a bit reticent, but there was admission in a bit of. I'm answering in a indirect way because they kind of answered it in an indirect way. But yeah, they get online, Paul. They don't try to hide that, so they're quite familiar with what's on there. Yes. I'm trying to think in terms of. I think some of the data they presented and then confirmed through their own experience was the lowered rates of sexual relationships between young people. I don't know if you are familiar with that data, but it's really gone quite a bit down. And so they sort of confirmed that, like they're not engaging maybe as much as previous generations with each other, at least, with sexual intercourse. And like the young woman who was speaking, and many others actually spoke to the angst, I guess is the right term, in some of their online dealings. And we know some of this just from our household, but young girls particularly are quite sensitive to what others are saying about them online, and it's like a huge megaphone, when it's 100 people saying it or 1,000 or whatever, compared to bullying as we would have known it as young people. So they definitely spoke to that, that some of the angst that they went through. This is back to the social media question, but kind of relates. think she was away. Sorry.
Getting back to the sex robots, I think there is probably some application for people who are out of the norm sexually, who can't perform as well with a person, or who have a handicap that prevents them from performing normally. So I can see some application there.
Yeah, and that actually was presented by our students. That is, I think, an area where, this has seen some growth exactly in the ways that you pointed out. Someone with a disability, dysfunction of some kind, or someone who is uncertain about their own orientation. A lot simpler, less costly way to experiment. So that was presented. I did not. That's another area where I had no clue. I wasn't thinking along those lines at all. But just like you did, some students pointed that out.
Just a comment on what Kate was saying. There's an area in treatment called sex therapy, sex therapists, basically. And one of the projects I was involved in had sex therapists.
Surrogate?
A surrogate, yeah. And something like a sex robot could be really useful to address some of the questions you're talking about, what you were saying about people not being able to function, and also working through more complicated issues of sexuality and sexual performance. So in a respected profession of sex therapy, it might become a therapeutic tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's one of the videos that our students showed was a comedian, I can't remember her name, but sort of as part of her comedy, she had a sex robot built that looks just like her. But she's a very smart, sharp, young comic. And then I heard a podcast with her later explaining this exact thing, that when she went to meet with the company that was manufacturing them, that she was thinking through all these, exactly like you're thinking, sex surrogates and people experimenting and that kind of thing. And so to her, it was a much bigger thing than just a joke of having a sex robot that looks like her that guys would, be interested in.
I was just questioning the data about whether the frequency of intimacy has declined, because where are the data coming from? If they're self-reported, there's always been bias in that. For instance, boys always report a higher frequency of sex than girls. How can that be? If it's heterosexual sex.
Do you think that it may be that they're just reports? There'd be a reason that someone might report less, even though they aren't actually engaging less? Because wouldn't you be comparing self-reports to self-reports?
So, for instance, if the boys are being more honest and they're self-reporting, it'll go down.
But the question is, would boys be more honest now? Is there some other reason that the self-reports would change compared to 20 years ago?
I think possibly.
Yeah, that seems possible. I don't know.
I mean, so the objective assessments would be like rates of venereal disease and such.
Yeah, and those are down. And rates of pregnancy are down. But that could have other explanations, too.
I mean, yeah, you have public health effects on that.
Right.
Thank you, Aaron. Very interesting, as always. And January is open for next year, too. So, but one of the things that really disturbs me when we go out to have dinner or lunch, you will see a family sitting at the table, and there will be 4 people, and all of them are on their phone. They're not engaging at all in conversations with each other. It's interacting with their telephone.
Well, isn't it interesting? Everybody that came up here today brought their device. Did you notice that? Like I brought my little tablet and brought your phone. Harry brought his computer.
Yeah, it was interesting. Some of the friends that I visited, when I would walk in the house, we each had a phone in our hands. But I was curious, Eric, if
if any of the students, with regard to the bullying and the concern about rising suicide rates, did they have any suggestions of how to try to counter this?
This was another surprise. I'm kind of glad you brought that up. In that, with our young, well, not so young kids, we're constantly trying to get them to resist the lure of the device. And it's hard, like we're losing that fight constantly. So my general expectation is all young people just want to be attached to their devices all the time. But a number of students, just from the course, at least I think, from talking through all these issues, started to kind of create rules for themselves to kind of contain, their device use. They were talking about, well, I'm just going to put it away when I'm X, whatever, in the car with my parents, or they would, or when I go to bed, I'm just going to put it over by my, chest of drawers. They started to create little policies for themselves to manage this. Like they're the ones saying, "Wait a second, this is kind of like, too much." So I don't know that directly deals with the bullying aspect, but at least they're seeing kind of the effect of being overly connected and wanting to modulate that, right? I have a way to step away from it. And I see that a lot just with podcasters, people in the media, will announce they're going to be off social media for the next week or whatever. It seems to be that you hear that people are fighting the need to keep some distance.
Well, Eric, thanks for bringing up a difficult topic in the congregation. Although we are at a disadvantage, we're mostly boomers, hardly any millennials out there. Sorry, Kate. But you're a millennial at heart. But anyway, you are a boomer, I know. It might be helpful to have a panel of students next time, because you could get a better representation of how they're feeling. They're having to transfer all their information through you to us, and there's a lot of filters there. All of you doing a great job. I was intrigued that the Japanese use cyber relationships, where they have a computer program that they're talking, that young males talk to, because it's less rejection or acceptance. They talk to them in the morning when they're getting up, and they talk to them in the afternoon when they get home from work. Much different relationship. But it might also be partly caused by there's been a 50% global drop in sperm count in the last 40 years, and it drops 1.5% a year. And it's curious if that's also a reflection of the pregnancy rates, the sperm, the testosterone. And if that trend continues in 30 years, we'll have a sterile population. I think genetics has kind of a built-in system to limit our population growth. And maybe affecting relationships if you have less desire, less intensity. And
of course, we're going way into the area of speculation, which I've seen that data too, and it's pretty concerning. As a biologist, I think about that. I tend to think the simplest explanation, I don't know if it'll get me in trouble or not, is that, guys respond to pressures from gals. And if the pressure from gals on the large scale is tone down the virility, then there's less virility.
Actually, when men were treated, or men were encouraged to show more compassion, over a year's time, testicular size shrank 20%. Few studies where men were training people how to speak.
Eric, I'm kind of attached to the hip to my phone, and when I went to visit Phyllis's family for Christmas, the first dinner, some question came up where there was a factual answer, and I looked it up, and I was told that phones were banned at the table. which took me aback. I felt rejected. But the second comment I have is that I just want to bring out that we're in the middle of a revolution. This whole computer impact, the web, Facebook, all this stuff, technology, the cell phones, GPS, we're right in the middle of a huge transition of the human race. And it's very hard to see what's going on when you're in the middle, which is what you're trying to do, which makes it especially interesting. The last thing is that the place where I'm running into something odd is that I sometimes work with younger children, 8, 10. I had a robot team this year that was 10. And it was I wanted to get them on. It would be a lot better for me if they were on the internet. I could put up videos for them. I could put up instructions. And yet it turns out that I don't want to be the one to introduce them to the internet if they're already on and their parents are okay with it. But the internet is a giant trap for kids growing up. Now, by the time they get to be 18, you pretty much have to give them license to do whatever they want. But if you have a young child, you've had your children just growing up, going through this process of what's on there, the access, I would think that is the moral threat. At what point do we allow children full access to how bad the human race is?
Yeah, I was looking around to assess, who are still the parents with young kids. I think it may just be Aaron and us with the 9-year-old. Okay, and Amy. Jonathan Haidt, I think, is the best resource right now for us. He's, I think he's at NYU. He's a psychologist. Do you know Jonathan Haidt? Does that sound familiar? So I was right. Okay, good. He has gathered a lot of the evidence together and very nicely published it all just on a Google Drive that anybody can view. And he has put out some guidelines that he thinks would be useful. And I would not call him an alarmist. I think he's pretty realistic. But he comes down on the side of you got to manage the access. And he provides some guidelines, like I said, with age and grade and amount of time and that sort of thing. But yeah, he's like you can't give them a phone and let them go crazy, when they're 6, 7 years old.
How about Jonah?
What you said is really no different from what parents have always done. It's just there wasn't an electronic device involved. One parent's Raymond Johnson always to set limits of whatever sort for whatever the kids are doing or about to do, set guidelines and so on. And it's just that this is called a sewing rhythm.
And it's a strong magnetic, like Lauren to the device is like she's, it taps into the dopamine system so effectively. It's just harder to put that boundary in place, I think, maybe.
Having 3 grandchildren from 18 to 25, so I have 3 data points. So what I say must be factual. And one thing I've noticed among them is the declining interest in long-term relationships or committed relationships. There's just not that much interest, but casual sex is okay. And I've seen this. I've been seeing this in the last 10 or 20 years. It's just a change in that behavior.
Are they in college?
2 would be college age. 1 is going to college next year.
Okay. Well, let me interject just a second before you go on, because I just read this very interesting data that in populations where the ratio of females to males is positive, in other words, there's more females around than males, the males get to call the shots a little more, and they prefer the casual hookups, and the females aren't really in a position to, negotiate, because there's a lot fewer guys, and colleges are starting to look more and more like that. Whereas when the ratio is the reverse, then it's really, there's pressure on the guys. This speaks to my point that guys will respond to what girls want. So there's pressure on the guys to value the long-term relationships. So yeah, if there's more guys, then you end up with guys who are perfectly willing to invest in long-term relationships.
So you're saying it's a function of the demographic changes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Or at least that's what this study suggested that I just read.
I just wanted to address the young man, the first guy who spoke after you brought up your sex robot topic. It sounded like he thought maybe it would be good for marriages to split off physical intimacy from emotional intimacy. And I see those two as ideally unified for the best relationships. So I think that's interesting. He thought it might help marriages.
Yeah, I don't know. It was not intuitive to me at all either. I just thought, wow, they're coming to a different conclusion than I would have with the increased availability of simulated sex. Yeah, I don't know how it's going to play out ultimately. I have the same intuition you do.
Anybody else?
I'd just like to say that I would be interested to hear responses and a similar study with people in a different phase of life, like us.
That's another good reason. I like this panel idea, and I'm certain that I could rally a few students, particularly if it was, the course is in the fall, so it might be better if we're going to do the panel to do it in late fall, and that could be part of the course, like we've got a few students to come in, so we'll keep that in mind.
You're going to do this course next year?
Probably. I guess we'll see, but I think it went over pretty well. Students really seem to respond well. So, depending on how that program shapes up. If I don't get into too much trouble for any of my topics, yeah.
And by then, the cyber world would be different.
Something will be different. Something will have happened.
Thank you.
Thank you.